everyone, it's Mike Andes, and today we're gonna go take a deep dive on how to do mowing pricing. Now, you might have seen things like just by square footage. Today, we're going deep. We're gonna talk about 4 different models that you can use when it comes to pricing, and it's not what you think. Because a lot of us are using the eyeball version of, I think that is $40. I think that is $50. Oh, and that's $50 because the last person was $50 and they kind of was about the same amount of time. And so that's how most people do pricing. This is going to go the exact opposite extreme. We're going to look actually at graphs in terms of how pricing works when it comes to price matrices. This could apply to any service where you're adding labor to an estimate. So the anatomy of a home service estimate. The goal is to come to a cost for an instant quote, an estimate, a visit, or an invoice. The end result is going to be something like this, and usually just off in budget hours, like number of hours and what our rate is. So if we have 2 budget hours at $75 per hour, that's $150 would be our rate. We're trying to have a baseline for the cost of service. There are many things that go into this, such as the slope of the yard, the distance of the property, etc., that we're not trying to model. These are ultimately the responsibility estimator to adjust for. So this is ultimately why, regardless of how accurate you get with cost matrices and getting super detailed square footage and the size of the trees and all this other stuff, I ultimately know that that's going to be inaccurate to some extent because there's all these other variables besides the shape of the tree, besides the square footage of the lawn. Square footage of the lawn is fine until it's on a 30% slope and it takes 10 times longer because you just have to weed whack everything instead of using a mower. And so there are other variables involved, but square footage, for example, with mowing is a big component of it. Square footage in a lot of home services is a big component of it. Linear feet, for example. But there are other variables, and the reason I say that is because we get so locked in on one linear foot, square foot model that we forget that, like, we could be as precise as possible on this, but as soon as you change one other variable that's not in that model, it all falls apart. So the most basic case is the default most basic case for defining a service. Everything else that we discuss here is a more advanced or complex use case. And that is ultimately we're selling units of time. An hour, 1.5 hours, half an hour. These are units of labor, okay? And you could sell that for mowing. That's the simplest form. That will take 1 hour to do the job. Okay, great. Times that by $80 per hour, your cost is $80 per hour. That's the simplest and most basic form. And ultimately, I don't think it's necessarily a horrible thing because if you're just starting out and you use that model, the only thing you need to do then after that is compare budget hours, so that 1 hour, compared to the actual hours it takes you on that property over the course of time. Like Copilot, this would be under your visit reports. It compares and shows green and red above or below what your budget hours are for that job. So you know if you need to raise prices or decrease prices. In other words, increase budget hours or decrease them. Key components: base or minimum cost, variable cost, and efficiency at scale. These are 3 key components that go into a much more complex version of what we talked about. So see, there's always a base or minimum price. This is the minimum that you would want to charge for a site visit due to the build and overhead of customer acquisition, travel, schedule, billing, loading and unloading a truck, etc. There are 2 ways to handle this. Either A, add an add-on cost, so 0.5 hours plus how long it actually takes you, or a minimum floor, so max 0.5 budget hours, for example, then add on the number of work hours on site. So this kind of accounts for the fact that you're going to have minimum size jobs. If a lawn takes 6 minutes to mow, I'm gonna still charge at least half an hour because it takes me time to travel there, schedule, the overhead, the billing, also taking the truck, like unloading the truck, loading it back up, all of that extra time. All right, now let's add a little more complexity in here. Variable cost plus visit cost. So to separate the cost of a visit. All right, so now let's go ahead and take into account that there is a minimum price on a visit. The graph is gonna look something like this. When I compare yard size on the x-axis to y-axis of hours of labor, I'm gonna have a minimum, 0.5 budget hours right off the rip, then add on an extra time after that, because that's my minimum cost. Now, if I use a minimum as a floor, see this changes. Because like, look, I'm not gonna charge it immediately and then on top of that, my hours, I'm just gonna say, hey, look, I'm not gonna go down here in terms of budget hours. There's always a minimum of 0.5. So again, these are the little tiny details that in pricing, how you wanna think about this. Are you having a minimum like fee just to show up, then adding budget hours? Or do you have a minimum number of budgeted hours that you're not gonna go below, as shown here? In this model, you charge less and your scheduled travel costs are just overhead, okay? The variable cost. This is the cost of the actual services that you're providing. The key inputs for estimating budget hours for a lawn, for example, lawn mowing, are size of the yard and the mower used. This is based on equipment on hand and the size of the yard. The single biggest factor in scaling mowing costs is that when you hit a yard size that allows you to upgrade to a bigger and more efficient mower. The points at which you level up to new equipment varies by service. There are other inputs that are more nuanced and are generally only determined through a visit to the yard, conversation with the owner, etc. So what this means is, if I'm, it's like, well, am I able to mow 1,000 square feet per hour? I'm just making up numbers. When I use a push mower, great. Does that mean that if you have a 5,000 square foot lawn, it's gonna take you 5 hours? Well, yeah, but now I have a 40-inch stand-on mower that I can do 3,000 square feet in 1 hour, for example. Well, all of a sudden, I'm not taking the same amount of time. The budget hours are totally different when I upgrade my equipment. So this is another variable. You can't just say, oh yeah, we mow X amount per hour. Okay, great, but like what piece of equipment are you using? Well, if it's a small yard, we can only use a smaller piece of equipment. So our production rate's lower. So these are things you gotta think about. So let's model this variable cost. Each service generally estimates cost based on hours, so we'll limit this discussion on how to model the hours for a service using the following approaches. These are the 4 approaches I talked about before. Single cost for everyone, this is what we call flat rate. Stepped cost, flat rate matrix. Linear cost per square foot, our production rate. And then linear cost with efficiency bumps, production rate matrix, all right? So seems very complicated. I'll break it down, it'll be really simple. All right, flat cost is like, hey, we are having a promotion. Everyone gets their lawn mowed for $59. Everyone. That's what this would be, flat cost. Doesn't matter how many square feet you're getting this. I don't recommend this for mowing because you could lose your shirt on it. So don't recommend flat costing. Okay. But there are times you might do this as a promotion, for example, with like pressure washing someone's driveway or trimming a bush trimming or a property cleanup. It's like, hey, look, we'll do all property cleanups. It's the first 10 people that sign up are $4.99. And then there are people that you might usually charge $8.99, but they're getting it for $4.99. There will be people that get it for $2.99 usually, but they're paying $4.99, but everyone's flat rate. That's what this is here. Now, this is more common. Stepped cost or flat rate matrix. Similar to the last one, but the rates are locked into fixed steps. This is kind of what we use when it comes to instant quotes for small, medium, and large. It's not as accurate, right? So for example, there could be someone way up here or way down here. Like there's way more room for error. However, it's very, very simple. If you're just getting started, I recommend starting with this one because it's very easy to be like, okay, I have 4 or 5 different sizes of properties and if it falls in these ranges, here's my pricing. Very simple. Is it perfectly accurate? No. But remember, even if you got laser-like accuracy on square footage, there's still so many other variables that are going to come into play. How far they are from your shop. Is there a massive driveway before the lawn that you got to go up and down? Can you even get the truck back there? Do they have a backyard? Do they have a gate? Do they have irrigation? Do they have a dog like in the backyard? Like there's so many different variables that getting so precise is, it's got to be like way more accurate than the 3 or 4 options. That's when I start to laugh is because like there are so many other variables you're not even taking into account. Now here's the more accurate version. Stepped up cost with more steps. In practice, this approach requires the manual creation of many steps to simulate a linear scale, even if you only have 3 kinds of equipment. All right, now then we have linear cost per square foot. This is the kind of like when people say, hey, I can mow 3,000 square feet per hour. Great. That means if I have 18,000 square feet, I should have 6 budget hours. It's linear. It does not take into effect that if you have a massive property, you're going to get bigger equipment. It doesn't take into account that a 2,000 square foot lawn does not take 20% as long as a 10,000 square foot lawn. Why? Because there's a whole bunch more perimeter and edging and blowing off of the sidewalks. So this is never actually the reality, but when people start talking about production rates, this is where I get a little afraid, is they use something linear, which usually means they get priced, they get way too expensive on the big jobs and they're too cheap on the small jobs. So something to think about. Linear cost with efficiency bumps. So the cost scales proportionally with the yard size, but at certain thresholds, you can switch to more efficient equipment. This is what is closest to reality, all right? This is the model that most aligns with the reality. And that is, yes, it takes longer to mow someone's lawn, the larger the square footage. However, there are inherent efficiencies of staying on the same larger property. You use larger pieces of equipment, and usually you're out in the bigger the property, you're going back and forth more often instead of around the perimeter, around bushes, around flower beds, around the house, etc. So linear cost with efficiency bumps. To avoid those awkward fractional hours, we round to the nearest square footage or hours. Again, this is the most common because here, if I use this, that would mean that if I have 12,000 square feet, I'm charging the customer like $69.41. Most of us are going to round. Now, to the same token, if I'm charging, based upon this most accurate form of pricing, I'm going to be at $74.91. I would probably just tell you to go do $79 per cut, and you will probably not reduce your close ratio very much at all. And so that would be a form of kind of rounding to the nearest number in order to be able to get a more rounded number. Usually nines work great. If you're charging someone $66.41, I would just charge them $69 and your close ratio will hardly drop at all. So that's what that one is. Now, linear cost with efficiency bumps. This is actually the most accurate. This is the actual cost, but this one's impossible, like very difficult to do pricing with. And this is what the actual costs look like as you switch to better equipment in terms of budgeted hours. Because if I'm able to go from a 21-inch mower to a 40-inch stand-on because the property gets a little larger, I might actually do the lawn in a shorter amount of time because I was able to bump up the amount of size of equipment. So this is what in reality it looks like, but when it comes to actually figuring out pricing to the customer, I'm not gonna charge the customer less because I upgraded my piece of equipment, right? I am going to keep going up. I am not going to give them a discount. Oh, great. We can use the 40-inch mower on this property. Oh, it's going to take us half as long. We can go half the cost. I might go down a little bit, i.e. that's why I have this efficiency curve, but I'm not going to jump down. I'm not going to charge someone less because their property is larger, which unlocks bigger piece of equipment for me. And this is why I'm a big fan of using the smallest piece of equipment you can get away with to serve 80% of your customers. Because as soon as I have a massive mower that services a few of my customers, if that's sitting on my trailer, I am essentially paying all the extra overhead for 80% of my customers that do not actually utilize that piece of equipment and don't unlock this extra efficiency. So it's just dead weight, it's overhead. And this graph kind of portrays that. And that is like, hey, I'm not going to give someone a discount just because I've used bigger pieces of equipment. All right, so what would the inputs look like? This kind of comes back to like the engineering side. This is what flat rate might look like. I have labor, I have number of hours, flat rate. Across the board, I'm charging the same amount of hours, same amount of size of lawn. Then I have a flat rate matrix. You're going to have ranges from 0 to 1,000 square feet, half an hour labor. From 1,000 to 5,000 square feet, 1 hour. This is the most common. People use this one a lot because it allows you to have the customization of being able to move this in increments that you want along that slope. So this is probably the most common way to do inside of Copilot's rate matrices. It's usually using this one. Now, production rate is going to scale linearly over the course of time. I like it because it's really, really simple. It's like, how long does it take you to do this? I get X amount of square feet per hour. Great. How many square feet? There's my hours. Boom. Simple. It just doesn't take into account other variables like the fact that as the property gets larger, as you have less stops, as you're at a property, like you get more efficient. So it can sometimes lead to inaccurate bids on larger properties. Then you have your production rate matrix, which again means that as we get into larger size properties, there are inherent efficiencies gained because of equipment, because we don't have to do as much perimeter, etc. So if that hurt your brain, I want you to focus on one thing and one thing only: getting the customer. If this is helpful, go to MikeAndes.com where there's over 50 hours worth of online training completely free to help you grow your home service business. The reason that I'm okay with step-ups and less of them is to be able to get the price to the customer as fast as possible. This is why we do it over the phone, or we do it right from our website using instant quotes, because I want the customer to accept my bid as quickly as possible. I know there are so many variables that go into an accurate mowing price. I want to get as close as I can, but most importantly, get them on the schedule. If I get them on the schedule, then I'll be able to see over the course of time how long the job actually takes and then be able to adjust my prices accordingly. The only reason you would not do this is if you had so little cash in the bank that you could not get by for a month or two of being a little bit underpriced on some of your jobs. By the way, on instant quotes, on over the phone pricing, sometimes you will overbid the job, they'll accept, and you continue forward. So there's also inaccuracy on the other aspect of it. When you have those big jumps and those tiers, like small, medium, and large is 3 tiers. We have a 4th one, which is other. So anything really, really big or crazy looking. Like we have 4 tiers. Get them on the schedule, and then over the course of time, using your visit reports, you got to track, is it above budget hours or below? And then make an accurate description of like, oh, I know now that it doesn't take 0.82 budget hours. It takes 0.96 budget hours. Oh, if I change the price to account for 0.96 budget hours, here's the new price. That's how you do pricing. And in my opinion, the companies that grow the fastest are the ones that get the customer in the door, prove their value, and make sure that the pricing is not so precise. Everything's got to be so perfect. And now it's taking you 2, 3, 4 days to get an estimate to a customer. If it's taking you more than 24 hours to get your pricing to a customer, in my opinion, you want to simplify your services. You want to standardize your product offerings in order to get those estimates out faster. And I'm willing to give a little bit of accuracy away in order to get the job and then get the actual job hours over the course of time. Again, if you are so dialed in, you want everything system and automated, this is not as accurate as you might like. But if you're trying to grow your business, focus on speed to close and speed to getting the lead instead of trying to get everything so precise and so accurate, but you're getting the estimate a week later and your close ratio is going from 60% down to 30% because all your competition already beat you to getting the job. And by the time you show up, the customer's saying, I already got someone else. So if you like this sort of breakdown that's very analytical about pricing, comment below. There's a whole bunch of other pricing videos about mowing that's much more tactical and show you the mowers and you're outside and looking at lawns. This is much more mathematical and theory-based, but when you're talking about the real world, this has direct implications, and I look forward to next year sharing a lot of this when it comes to Copilot CRM. Thank you all.